Laura here, and I've always been pleased with the work that I've produced. In the past few years, I've experienced great success at my large company. However, over the past few months, I've become more and more sure that my marriage to Adam is failing. Our 5-year marriage began with a few very passionate and loving years. But for the past 6 months, something changed in our relationship. One of the reasons was the distance. I started to get worried when we almost stopped seeing each other. I even began to worry that Adam could be seeing someone else, but no matter how hard I searched for proof, my suspicions were unjustified. He was still caring, even if there seemed to be an invisible wall between us. Brad then started living with us. Brad is Adam's nephew. One night after dinner, Adam asked me to help Brad get a job at my company. I agreed to assist Adam since he stated he was looking for a new opportunity to grow and that he was very capable. The next morning, Brad came into my office. It surprised me how much he had changed since I had last seen him. Even though he was now a charming, confident, and ambitious young man, there was something about the situation that truly bothered me. Despite my years of hard work, I hadn't been promoted in a while. Perhaps it was because, even though I knew he didn't like it, I always told my employer the truth. I've always told it straight. I don't like to sugarcoat things. Then, when he was suddenly brought up to my level after only 1 month on the job. It was shocking. I couldn't believe how quickly he had advanced in his career. I began to feel awful about it since it seemed unjust in some sense. Had his month been worth a year of my years of devotion? Or was it less about your actual expertise and more about your ability to blend in with the boss? With time, my friendship with Adam grew more and more icy. Our conversations became dull as we discussed business or personal matters during our seldom evenings together. We started to find ourselves having less and less time for each other, and it felt like a snowball effect. I tried to figure out why we were apart. But our talks were usually strained and pointless. I could feel the gap growing between us, but I didn't know how to bridge it. Meanwhile, Brad, who had lately started working for my company, found himself concentrating more and more on me. I avoided him, yet he was friendly and inviting with his confidence. Nevertheless, I tried to behave professionally. But at this rate, Laura, he laughed, I'll be your boss soon if you don't follow my instructions. You may kiss your career goodbye. Despite the fact that these jokes were innocuous, I thought he was making illicit suggestions. I answered with a trembling giggle, trying not to take anything he said too seriously. Our supervisor assigned us to work on a big project together that took a lot of overtime. We used to routinely stay late at work together. Brad was easygoing and fun, but I couldn't shake the unpleasant feeling I had. His activities became more and more flamboyant with time. He looked at me as if he knew something that I did not. I enjoyed the attention, but I forced myself not to give in to temptation. Every time we worked into the night, I felt terrible about it. I knew, on the one hand, that I needed the attention that Adam was not giving me. But I knew I was putting myself at danger. The night was quite tense. Once again, Brad and I were working late at the office on an assignment. I was so tired that all I wanted to do was finish everything and head home. As usual, Brad seemed relaxed, which irritated me a little. These long nights spent together in solitude seemed to please him. Despite his best efforts to remain polite, there was something horribly wrong with the way he was staring at me. That night, I was dressed as usual in one of my favorite skirts. I've always liked wearing lovely, rather short skirts to work. They accentuated my figure, which made me feel good about myself. However, I had noticed that Brad had been staring at me longer than was really necessary ever since we had started working together. I was suddenly circled from behind by Brad, and as I bent to get some papers off the table, I felt his weight on me. My pulse raced, and I froze for a moment, unsure of how to answer. It was unexpected and daring. I turned quickly and smacked him. Brad flinched at my answer, startled. I exclaimed, "You've lost your mind," full of anger, yet I felt something else entirely on the inside. As a matter of fact, though, I didn't slap him because I found it offensive. No, I was enraged by his arrogance. It was just too bold. Even for his usual shenanigans, a mixture of embarrassment and irritation at letting things get to this point was seething within of me. But I could not afford to look weak, so I turned around and left right away. After that night, Brad and I were in such intense tension that it was almost unbearable. Over the next 3 days, we didn't speak much. Every time I caught sight of him in the office, a knot in my gut tightened. I felt terrible and ashamed about what had transpired and was unable to get past it, putting our professional relationship in peril. Above anything, though, I was sorry for Adam. For the past 6 months, we had scarcely had any intimate moments. Though I was trying not to worry about it too much, this was bothering me. However, the Brad incident made me consider the true shortcomings in my marriage. I tried not to let job or family consume my thoughts, but Brad was always on my mind. His presence at work extended beyond exchanges pertaining to his work. Even though it was quite quiet while we were working, I felt a strong draw. His sporadic looks in my direction just made the internal conflict I was experiencing worse. Brad seemed eager to reconnect with me. He tried multiple times to apologize for what had happened. He said that everything was an accident and that he had no idea things would turn that nasty. I was aware that it was a lie. But because I was so eager to believe what he stated, I chose not to press the issue. I felt deep down that the situation had to end, even though I forced myself to think I could take it. Brad had a different suggestion that night. To ease the tension of the evening. "Let's grab some drinks," he added. "It'll make the work easier," though I was hesitant. I secretly hoped it would. Over the last several days, our tension had been steadily increasing, and I thought that doing so would make things less unpleasant. After we placed our drink orders, the office mood quickly lightened up. As we worked while enjoying our drinks, I noticed that I was letting go of my uncertainties and fears minute by minute. I laughed as Brad told jokes. I was feeling liberated at that rare moment, temporarily putting my marital problems behind me. Brad made an effort to put the past behind him and apologized. He was making an effort to mend our relationship, so I hesitantly agreed to give it a shot. Brad once unexpectedly leaned in to give me a kiss. It was a long, intense kiss, and in spite of all my inner reservations, I gave in. His lips would not quit, and his touch was confident but soft. I was losing myself in the moment, but I drew away as soon as his hands began to squeeze my hips. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest that my breathing became labored. I looked aside, experiencing a rush of remorse and terror. I realized that I had stepped over the cue, but there was nowhere else for me to go. I stood up and muttered. "I'm sorry I was unable to remain in the room with him alone any longer. I knew that the consequences would be inevitable if I didn't quit immediately." A few days after our previous meeting, Brad called me and asked me to dinner. He indicated that there was an urgent issue that needed to be resolved regarding job documents. I felt that there was still unresolved business between us, so I hesitated before agreeing. I was a little anxious when I first arrived, but I made an effort to concentrate on the task at hand. Brad proposed that I stay for supper, as I was about to depart after we had swiftly concluded our discussion of the documents. He persuaded me by claiming that the evening was still young, and we had already collaborated so much. I accepted, but a warning flag went up inside of me. Brad prepared a lovely supper, and as each glass of wine was taken, the mood grew more laid back and personal. We laughed, spoke about life, and talked about work. It all felt so natural, and I let myself forget about my obligations to Adam for a little while. The atmosphere had grown even more personal by the conclusion of dinner. I didn't back away as Brad moved in to kiss me again. The tension and longing that had been rising inside of me were palpable. When our lips met, every wall I had built inside came down. His touch was confident but soft, and the kiss was full of need and passion. There was no question between us when we found ourselves in his bedroom. When Brad caressed my hand lightly, shivers rose all over my body. There was warmth and desire in his touches, and I sensed that our bond was getting stronger. I felt his warmth as I pressed myself closer to him, and all else vanished. His hands stroked gently over my body, as if attempting to memorize every moment, and his breath on my neck sent thrills down my spine. We moved in unison, and each touch had a very intimate quality, as though we had at last revealed something long concealed. I knew at the end of the night that I had gone too far, but at that point, nothing else mattered except what was going on between us. It all seemed to be a blur. I tried to pretend like nothing had occurred when I got home. Adam knew I'd been with his nephew, but he didn't suspect a thing. Although there was nothing to worry about in his opinion, I was troubled by my conscience and sensed that something bad would happen. I could feel more strongly every day that my marriage to Adam was coming to an end. Our evenings together were spent in silence, and our chats had grown formal. It had been a while since he had expressed any interest in my sentiments or ideas, and despite my best efforts to pretend otherwise, an increasing emptiness was beginning to seep into my being. It got tougher to hold everything inside after what had happened to Brad. When Adam got home from work one evening, I knew that this could not continue. Seeing my discomfort, he struck up a conversation of his own. Though he spoke calmly, his eyes betrayed alarm. Glancing at me, he said, "Laura, you've changed. And I can't help but notice that. You seem to not truly be here. Has anything occurred?" I was struck hard by those remarks and realized that the time had come. My feelings could no longer be suppressed. I'm not sure how to put it, but Adam, it feels like we're not in this together anymore. I got started, looking for the appropriate words. I'm really lonely. We no longer feel close to each other. And it seems like you are fading too. He appeared as though he had just heard this for the first time. Feeling lonely? There was surprise in his voice. That's not how I ever intended you to feel. Possibly because I've been so preoccupied with work in our lives. I overlooked something significant. Perhaps all we need to do is travel somewhere together like we used to revitalize our relationship. Even though he talked with hope in his eyes, I was still full of skepticism. I no longer knew if such gestures might make a difference. Our issues extended beyond not going on trips together. Already, something had changed inside of me, and I wasn't sure whether it could be undone. I lowered my gaze and responded quietly. I'm not sure that will help. It seems like it goes beyond that. We both stopped talking. We were both too scared to speak it aloud, but there was a tight mood in the room and I sensed something significant hanging in the air. My chat with Adam had left me feeling exhausted. Our issues were more serious than I had thought, and the likelihood of our marriage disintegrating grew closer every day. I couldn't carry on with my internal conflict and state of uncertainty. I had to make sense of my emotions and determine what my true desires were. I made the decision to take a break from work and let Brad and my supervisor know about it. Brad looked anxious when I informed him I was heading out for a few days. I knew he was worried, but I needed some distance and time. I assured him in a text message that I will clarify everything when I returned. I went to stay with Sarah, who is my closest friend. We had not seen one another for a while, and I thought that being away from my familiar surroundings might give me a fresh perspective. I'd always felt comfortable confiding in Sarah, and I thought that I could tell her everything that I had been experiencing. I realized that I couldn't resist my attraction to Brad throughout those brief days spent with her. Nothing that had transpired between us in the previous few months was coincidental. It went beyond simple physical attraction. I realized there was no use in fighting these emotions any longer. My want to be with him just became stronger every time I thought about him, and I knew I would eventually have to deal with this head-on. I thought I had made a solid choice when I got back home. I had to stop lying to myself and acting like everything was all right. It was time to face my relationship with Brad and decide what to do next. I had no idea what was ahead, but one thing was certain. I was unable to control my feelings anymore. Knowing that my life would never be the same again, I had to choose how to approach things with Adam at this point. I ultimately came to a decision after thinking about it for days. I could not continue to live a lie all the time. I was unable to suppress my emotions any longer. My love for Brad had grown too powerful for me to ignore. I chose to see him that evening without considering the repercussions. I failed to warn him. I just threw on a light jacket and headed over to his place. I remained silent until Brad answered the door. I felt all the feelings I had been suppressing explode inside of me as I looked into his eyes. I rushed myself into his arms and kissed him without thinking. Everything seemed so natural. His mouth, his touch. We moved towards his bedroom after sharing a kiss, as if there was no more time or place for contemplation. I watched as the flame of passion flared in his eyes as I took off my coat. All I had on was gorgeous, semi-transparent knickers, and there were no more obstacles between us at that very time. We felt a wild, passionate connection between our bodies that was filled with all the feelings we had been holding inside for so long. The months of tension that had grown between us permeated every moment. It went beyond just physical closeness. It was the letting go of every internal conflict and uncertainty. When I got home late that night, I assumed Adam was still at work. However, everything went awry as soon as I walked in. Adam was seated in the living room when he saw me and his eyes landed on me. There I was, wearing only my coat and pants, although his expression was silent at first. It was clear what he was thinking. He understood in that moment. Where were you? Despite sounding calm, there was a lot of anger in his voice. I searched for an explanation, but at that very moment, nothing came to me. We got into a brawl together. The moment Adam found out that I had slept with someone else, he became enraged. Did you cheat on me? Laura felt like a condemning question. I couldn't make myself believe it was Brad. I knew it would destroy their family. I stayed silent, yet my silence was more powerful than my words. In the end, we both realized that our marriage was no longer meaningful. We made the decision to part ways. However, Adam turned to face me angrily before I could go, saying, "Since you've accepted it, I might as well tell you. I admitted to you a few months ago that I cheated on you too, to his surprise, even though his words were intended to cause me grief." I felt neither disappointment nor pain. I looked at him calmly and said, "I knew I had suspicions at the time, but there was nothing to back them up. Strangely enough, I don't feel hurt anymore. Maybe it's because my feelings for you have long since faded. Unlike you, I have nothing left to lose." Adam said nothing, realizing that his attempt to harm me had failed. It seemed to me that this was our final farewell. Now that everything had been stated, I knew I had made the right choice and could leave. After Adam and I split up after all of the discoveries, I was left on my own. The house, which had been filled with gifts and comforting noises only moments earlier, appeared chilly and deserted. Every step I took served as a reminder of what was lost and will never be again. My heart was sad, even though I knew this was going to end. My marriage to Adam had been ruined long before now. Sitting in the silence, I considered how much had changed. Not just my marriage, but my entire life as I knew it had been destroyed by my choice. Now I have to start all over again. I considered this to be a wonderful thing, despite the fact that I felt empty within. I hadn't felt happy with Adam in a long time. Maybe there was no other way to find some peace within. But the question of forgiveness remained unsolved. Could I do anything to make up for everything that I had done? I was apprehensive. My deception, the lies, and all the suppressed feelings were bothering me, and I knew it would take some time to deal with them. Sometimes I felt like I would never be able to move past my guilt. Brad and I continued in touch. But there was no guarantee there either. We kept seeing one another, and every now and again I felt that our relationship would become more serious. But I recognized that I wasn't certain. Our conversations seemed more like a means of escaping reality than a true friendship. Maybe it was more, maybe it was just an illusion that would fade away soon. Time would tell. At this time I recognized that I had to start anew and prioritize my own needs. My bond with Brad could not be the only foundation for my future. Things had gotten really bad in my life, and I had to make some decisions about what was ahead.